Nothing said on the Touchgrass podcast is a recommendation to buy or sell any investments or products. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and the views expressed by anyone on the show are solely their opinions only, not financial advice or necessarily the views of the Touchgrass podcast. Our hosts, guests, and the Touchgrass podcast team may hold positions in the companies, funds, or projects discussed. Enjoy the show.
GM, welcome back to another Touchgrass podcast episode. Since I have a lot of insight into the Solana trenches and the Solana landscape, we've decided to invest into a new series focused on the Solana ecosystem. I wanted to bring on Dhrumil from the Archer team. I feel like Orderbooks are back, baby, and we need to start talking more about them. We need to start talking about how spot trading actually works on Solana. I have one of the experts, Dhrumil, with me. Dhrumil, how are you, man?
I'm good. Thanks, Rachit, for having me. It's great to be on the podcast with you finally.
Awesome, man. For context, we've been trying to schedule this for a while. I've been off the pod for a bit. KG's been doing a lot of these. I'm back with a Solana series. Dhrumil, start us off, man. Like, tell me, how does one actually get into, deciding that I want to build an order book on Solana? Like, what's the personal story here? How we get here?
Yeah, I think Solana and Orderbooks kind of got along really well since the beginning of this ecosystem. So Serum, in the historical context, like for everyone who probably doesn't, who's like new to Solana, Serum was this OG order book on Solana, kind of built by a lot of engineers working in the uh, FTX slash Alameda research ecosystem. And these guys built this actual on-chain order book. It was probably first order book at a blockchain scale that can support high frequency trading, and it was adopted by many market makers in the world. So it was a great time when like the actual trades that used to happen on the blockchain normally before Serum, it was just like a constant product AMM, right? You would probably have some math function determine how your swaps happen, but then this order book is what we use in traditional finance, and it only made sense to use them on the blockchain itself. The only problem was that until Solana happened, there was no blockchain that could support such high frequency trading at lower costs. So Serum was this magical application back then, and then like eventually, once like more and more applications were built, I think like Orderbooks kind of got lost once like after FTX incident happened, and people like back moved back to prop AMMs, aggregators, which right like works perfectly fine until they don't. And we think that order books are usually the best primitive for making markets in high frequency settings, especially now that we are onboarding awesome assets thanks to you guys at Sunrise, like onboarding new stocks and real world assets on Solana. I think an exchange like order book makes sense because it's like open, it's fully on chain, it's transparent, it basically has the same sort of market structure that is in traditional finance. So usually for all market makers and traders, it's much more deterministic to use an order book versus a very new primitive which is just working only for Solana, right? So we found a way to make an order book work in the current setting of Solana, and basically this order book is built so that market makers can be profitable. So it is fully on chain and it does not have any kind of adverse selection problems that the previous order books
Yeah.
had. Yeah.
And like Dhrumil, based on the research I've done, like I believe the kind of order book you have is like completely new. Like you haven't improved on the existing structure of order books. Like the way that the Archer order book works is like completely novel. Can you talk a little bit about like the differences between like maybe not even differences, like the evolution of order books that you've seen? Like we saw Serum, obviously with the unfortunate incidents that happened, order books weren't really adopted at the time. Like talk to me through the evolution of order books and how you got on to like Archer's current design and why you think this is the best way that an order book should be designed.
Yeah, sure. I think like one simple example I can explain, right? Like what previous order books did and what Archer does it differently is that imagine you have like a toll plaza, right? Like cars need to pass through that toll plaza. The way previous order books worked is you have the single lane, and all these cars are like traders, right? So all cars going through the toll plaza has to move through just one single lane. So it's basically a race to who gets to cross the toll plaza first. And previous order books had that problem because at the end of the day, all previous order books had this one market account on Solana, which everyone competed to write write first at, right? Like, and basically with trading, like speed has some advantages. So if you are like the first to come to the blockchain and get you, if you get to write your codes first, you basically have an advantage over the others. So we kind of wanted to remove that. So the way Archer changed is we created kind of this multiple lanes, you can say multiple highways. So all the traders can just directly update their books and quotes at the same time without competing. And this was like a game changer because we basically saw this happening with prop AMMs, like across aggregators. And we thought, like, what if we can use something like this, but give it an UX of an order book so that it applies to not just a few engineers and few teams knowing the nuances of Solana, but now it can apply to any trading firm across the world, right? So we kind of took this design principle and kind of like created this parallel architecture where every trader has their own account and they do not have to compete with each other in just updating their orders. So that is like the fundamental principle that changes Archer versus like the previous attempts. And yeah, that's why like it's basically like an efficiency gain, but that gain is like 10 to 100x, right? Like in terms of compute units, you kind of are 100x more efficient than a market maker who was trading on this previous order books. So it kind of gives you an advantage and does not like have bring you like costs for market making on chain, right? So that's what we try to do differently, and
But
it's been working so
theoretically,
far.
like PMMs and market makers, like how do they collaborate with Archer? Like how do they interact with Archer that's different from like the existing setup?
Yeah, so the way it works is right. If you are a prop AMM, you kind of have to build this whole program by yourself. You kind of have this maintenance of maintaining this program over time, and every time you want to make a change, you have to kind of deploy the program. Like you have to get in touch with aggregators, have those new changes reflected. What works with Archer is that you don't have to manage the program at all. Archer program already sits on Solana. What you have to just do is just focus on your market making strategy. So just as good as like if you were to trade on Binance, for example, you don't need to worry about how do I build an exchange for trading over here, right? Like you just have to care about your strategy. So that's the underlying goal. You traders don't have to worry about any kind of exchange nuances. Like we provide them the primitives so that they don't have to manage any programs. They can just get started. And if there's a listing, like for example, we onboarded Take Two yesterday with you guys. So if you kind of wanted to do market making on this asset, you can get live within a few minutes. And this is like quite difficult if you were to do it like a somewhat like a prop AMM or have your custom program do it. And it's also more expensive because it comes at the cost of these resources such as engineers, and like you hold this whole maintenance cost of maintaining a program. So I think that's the edge here, right? Like you can get live on Archer within a few
Yeah.
minutes.
So
Yeah.
would you say the evolution of like on-chain trading went from like AMMs, where capital efficiency was the question mark, then you had prop MMs, where capital efficiency was a little higher, but these MMs had to put in a lot more effort to be able to quote these assets, and then now we have order books like Archer, where the MM is able to, I would say, plug and play into the infrastructure and be able to focus on what they do best instead of you know investing into infrastructure that they can trade on Solana actually. Like, would you say that's like an appropriate way to describe how trading infrastructure has evolved and where we're
Yeah,
at right now?
yeah, pretty much. But I would like add just one minor change is that, like on Solana specifically, Solana was meant to do high frequency trading from the beginning, right? Like we did not start off with AMMs. We kind of wanted to start off with order books since the early days. The only reason why we kind of shifted to AMMs again is because there was this order book that got discontinued by the ecosystem, right? So all these market makers suddenly had to like get into the infra side of things, build their own program, and had to have this infra teams maintaining all of this. Now we think that all of that is unnecessary. Like if Serum was continued today, and like maybe if like Archer like Orderbook were present before then, we wouldn't have had seen prop PMMs on Solana at all. The only reason they existed is because order books were not used, and we think that we have a shot at changing that. So it also brings like a better market structure. So like the market making teams do not have to focus a lot on building the infra side of programs. They just have to focus on fetching the alpha, improvising their setup, and making the strategy better. Yeah.
That's an amazing hot take. To be honest, like I think the hot take comes out to be if Serum was not discontinued and it was actually built out properly, like Solana trading infrastructure right now would probably look a lot different. Do you have any insight on like, when Serum was closed down back in the day, why teams obviously tried to replicate the model and tried to do it themselves as well. Why has it taken us so long since the FTX fiasco happened to now for order books to be back in trend on Solana? Like, was it more of a trading infrastructure thing? Did Serum actually do something different back in the day? Like, why did it take so long to get us back to what we should have been doing back in that time?
Yeah, yeah. So I think there was an attempt at actually revamping Serum again, right? There was this project called Open Book. It was like a community led for people who were trying to do market making. But then eventually we started discovering all these new vectors of MEV from like on Solana, right? Like back then, like MEV was not but like it was a different kind of MEV than what we saw later on. So as we discovered more and more different kind of attack vectors against market makers, I would also like to give a shout out to Phoenix. So they kind of came up with this order book, which was like a crankless design, like an improvement on top of Serum. It was this whole different exchange. It was an order book, but they kind of like also did a great job, and they kind of discovered a lot of like difficulties and like MEV attack vectors against market makers. So I would say like we wouldn't have been able to do it immediately. Like until now, like there were like several attempts where we found that there were certain issues and certain MEV vectors that we hadn't explored when Serum was built. So now we kind of are at the stage where okay, now we know like what attack vectors are against market makers if they were trading on order books. So how do we solve them, right? Like the solution is not to move away from order books. The solution is to redesign the order book just so that we cannot have these attack vectors be present. And but yeah, I think that order books are great, and we are excited that we finally have a design which can work at scale.
Does that make sense? Does the sort of prominence of aggregators on Solana like Jupiter also make this easier now than it was like back in the day? Has that also made a difference in terms of order book adoption?
Yeah, I think aggregators are great in the sense where like if I'm building a new deck, so Orderbook essentially is like an exchange, right? So if I'm building a new exchange, I can plug into aggregators like Jupiter, like we have many of them now, Titan, and like if I've plugged in, I do not have to source for like users trying to come to my exchange for trading. So that's a great way to bootstrap like one side of flow, and that definitely has done a lot of good for Solana overall. And we think that like yeah, definitely like I think aggregation plays a lot of role in Solana, and even like all the trading terminals to be honest are like just like plugged into the aggregators at the end of the day, right? So our goal is kind of like how do we make sure that the market makers do not have to like sit and kind of come up with their custom setup, spend like months building it and months maintaining it. In fact, like if they have some sort of strategy, or even if they want to experiment, they do not have to go to the route of building like a program for it. They can just go live on Archer on day zero and like experiment with it from day zero.
So the goal isn't to take volume back from PMMs or take volume back from AMMs. It's actually to supplement and create infrastructure that is accessible to like a lot of people so that you can make markets more efficient and have them, compete a lot better with the same infrastructure and the same environment, but have them run like different strategies. Would you say that's the right way to frame it, or would you say like order books will take volume away from PMMs?
Yeah, we definitely see order books taking away volumes from PMMs because we think that it's like very scalable, right? So, for example, let's say there are 10 trading firms in the world who are like new to Solana, they want to come online and like they want to come on chain and trade. Like, if all of these 10 trading firms kind of tried to build their own program for like, which is basically the PMMs, it would take them some time and like resources to do so. Whereas they can just choose to do it on Archer and be live on day zero, right? Like it's basically a matter of scalability at that point, as in like we are able to scale to many markets and like have many market makers on chain without them having to create their own uh, programs. So I think that's great, and that's why like we have this advantage of being able to scale across many market makers without having to do any kind of program changes.
That makes sense. Like just for viewer context, like a lot of the premier market making firms that you see in crypto also run their own PMM book or like PMM shop. Essentially, what Dhrumil is talking about is there's a lot of technical nuance when it comes to Solana and actually building a PMM. If you're able to provide the infrastructure to these market makers to compete on Solana without having to invest into that technical infrastructure because of the amount of trading volume that Solana does on a daily basis, the it makes it a lot more lucrative for the MM to at least come and try to do and run their strategies on Solana, for instance. Dhrumil, do you have any insights on, okay, we saw PMMs make trading more efficient on Solana. You know, their quotes were better, it was better experience. Now we have this order book style system where MMs can come in and they can all compete. Why is it important that like a number of market makers come and compete and quote assets and so on? Like, how does that affect the trading experience for like the normal person that's trading like a tokenized stock, or not even a tokenized stock? Like, let's talk about any crypto asset, for instance. Why is this important for a lot of
Yeah,
MMs?
that's a great question. So, like, why are we doing all of this in the first place, right? So, it matters because, like, if you want to kind of trade, let's say Tesla on the blockchain, if there's only one market maker, only one team, which is them, gets to decide how much of fees does the trader pay, right? But if you have like multiple teams competing with each other to acquire the order flow, which is the trader, at the end of the day, they are in the business of serving the order flow, which is traders like me who wants to just purchase Tesla on chain. Then, like, since they are competing for me, their competition is going to drive the cost down towards minimal cost or probably around zero. And that is important because then, like, Solana suddenly becomes a space, like a place where the best, basically the costs are minimized. So the best place to trade Tesla anywhere is probably on chain, on Archer, on Solana. And that's why it kind of brings a lot of users to Solana, because at the end of the day, if the costs are minimum and if there's like a lot of traders coming in, there'll be market makers also competing in depth. So right now you may be seeing $1,000 of trades happening, but tomorrow you probably would want $10,000 of clips or $100,000 of clips. So that is only possible if you have like competing market makers competing amongst each other to serve the order flow, serve the users in the best way possible. And it's all about, like, reducing the costs, increasing the competition, so there's no single player deciding like how much of fees are like charged for traders. And that's overall great for users, great for like ecosystem overall. Yeah.
I would say the best analogy that I can provide is probably similar to intent style bridging, where we saw a lot of intense players come in and the cost of bridging an asset came down. Would you say that's an appropriate analogy to play here? Like, if more players enter, the user experience gets better because it becomes faster and cheaper. Is that the right
Yeah.
analogy I'm drawing?
Yeah, perfect. At the end of the day, users win because the costs probably go to zero. Yeah.
And then, okay, if we're talking about intense style bridging, like the liquidity requirements to do intense space bridging is tremendous, which is why a lot of people who run solvers end up leaving and they, don't find it as profitable as it probably was when we started off. What's different about providing liquidity or the liquidity requirements to actually be an MM for Archer versus them doing it solo as a PMM or even as like the AMM model? Like, obviously we've seen capital efficiency be better in the PMM model versus the AMM model. Do you think capital efficiency becomes better in this order book style even more?
Yeah. So capital efficiency is better with order books because you can like actively manage your quotes and quote like very tightly. But in terms of like how much of liquidity is required, it really depends on like how much of volume there is. So if you have like, let's say, 1,000 users, like probably $5 million of volume per day or $10 million of volume per day, then you have like certain you probably should be good with like around 250 to 500K of TVL at max, right? That should probably be good to serve most of the orders. But if you have like, let's say, suddenly like Solana is growing, we have tomorrow like 100,000 users. So at that point, like, adding more liquidity makes sense because these market makers are making money for every dollar of volume they serve, right? So if suddenly like volume is like from $10 million to, let's say, $50 million, if the volume has 5x, then it makes sense for them to also increase their liquidity on the books, because they have to scale the TVL as there's more demand. So it's only a question of like demand. To be honest, like if we have more traders, if we have more volume, liquidity is just like a scaling factor. Like they will just have to add it, and they basically make more money. And I think that's like that's basically the driving factor.
So theoretically, if let's say a tokenized stock like a SpaceX versus something like Solana or like Sol, for
Yeah.
instance, the liquidity requirements for both, if both volumes were same, would be the same for a market maker. Is that the right way to think about it? It's just like a volume game. It's not dependent on if it's like a crypto asset versus a tokenized stock, for instance. Is there any difference?
To be honest, you're more or less correct in the sense that uh, at the end of the day, TVL is basically just a way to gauge if I put like $100 in this, like serving this market, what is the return for me, right? So the way you kind of want to decide between Sol versus SpaceX is for every dollar that I put into each of these markets, how much of yield am I getting back? So if that yield is better than what I'm using my current liquidity at, let's say I'm getting 4% yield, but if Sol gives me 5% and SpaceX gives me 10%, then obviously I'll allocate my $100 not at the 4% yield, but allocate it such way that so that I'm able to get that yield. So yeah, at the end of the day, this yield comes from the volume, and basically it's just a matter of how much of yield there is per dollar of TVL that the market maker has to put in. And as we scale more volumes, the yield definitely increases, and so does competition. So that way you just have to kind of like iterate and kind of keep scaling your TVL as there's more activity happening. Yeah.
That makes sense. Um, there were one thing that I also wanted to ask, like obviously we can talk about why you picked Solana, like is probably the easiest choice in terms of the blockchain being scalable. I want to ask you a different question. Is this infrastructure possible on the EVM, for instance? Like, is that something you guys have looked into? Is this sort of order book style thing possible on that side of the pond?
Yeah, to be honest, like I have not spent a lot of time in the EVM space. Like I've been in crypto since 21, and I've only been on Solana most of my career. So
Let me flip this question. When you talk to market makers,
yeah.
when I talk to market makers, a lot of PMMs in for instance, do not want to compete on Solana because they think it's already competitive enough and they think that there's more edge on EVM land, which is why they're competing there. Do you see a lot of market makers who are maybe more primarily focused on the EVM look at Solana because Archer is providing the infra now?
No, actually, it's the invert problem, right? So what we are seeing is like there are more and more market makers who are actually excited to quote on Solana because there's like a lot of volume that there's on Solana as compared to several other ecosystems, right? So for example, I think Solana is leading in tokenized stocks, real world assets. So in that case, like what market makers have to do is they just want to serve order flow, and serving that order flow gives them profits or like the markouts, the spreads. So when they are kind of evaluating the competition, they just want the order flow, and Solana has like a lot of order flow for these assets. So I think it's in fact like what we are seeing is we are finding more and more market makers who are excited to come make like business on Solana, trying to set up shop. And in fact, like I'm not sure about EVM, but I think like market makers are quite flexible, right? Like if there's significant order flow, they are actually willing to, like they don't care about the tech stack as much as long as there's order flow. They are very flexible in terms of adapting the newer ecosystem or like the newer frameworks or tech stack, what have you. So they kind of are like very flexible in because they are like mostly technical, right? Like most of market making is some sort of it's some quantitative, but it's mostly engineering. So they are quite flexible in doing so. They just want to go into the ecosystems where there's a lot of order flow. So you have a lot of market makers reaching out to us, trying to inquire about how they can come to Archer and like serve like these serve these new markets that we are trying to onboard.
That makes sense. Dhrumo, this has been awesome. The one final question I have for you, in terms of where this is going, um, with every stage of building, there's obviously bigger challenges and bigger problems that are unsolved. What's like the biggest challenge or unsolved problem that you guys have right now while working at Archer? Is it a Solana tech stack problem? Is it a liquidity problem? Like, what's the biggest problem you guys are solving right now?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. And the biggest problem what we've tried to solve so far in the last few months is basically the costs for market making, right? So since like it's on a fully on-chain blockchain, like you have to kind of pay gas fees for every transaction you do, and maintaining an order book, like doing market making on this. So we have like an internal market making system that we operate so that we are aware of what market makers kind of have to go through if they want to use our product. So we kind of have the system running, and the cost for market making on Solana is a little high right now. Like high in the sense like, so if I'm a market maker, I'm evaluating a centralized exchange or Solana. Quoting on centralized exchange will be like free of cost because it's just an API call. but quoting on Solana, there has to be like there's a gas fee that I have to pay. So that gas fee kind of accumulates more and more as we kind of scale to do more high frequency trading and serve more markets. So I think that is not in general a problem if there's a lot of volume. So if I'm, let's say, making $10,000 per day on Solana, and if my costs are $1,000 in gas fees, that's okay because I get this $9,000 of profits. But what we're trying to do is trying to minimize this $1,000 of costs. So we've come up with like new different types of like defense mechanisms. For example, a maker could probably try to quote less, and like they can try to like they have certain sort of defense mechanisms where if they are kind of stale because they have certain budget issues, they can kind of like avoid quoting at certain times so their quotes are expired. And they're like they also have this mechanism where we are kind of working with several infra providers and trying to explore if we can build a batch system around it. So a batch system is what we currently have live. So we kind of have this one system that makes markets across 10 to 15 markets at once. So this one transaction is like making across 15 markets. So it's kind of like a hack around what we're trying to do. So I think in the long run, I'm sure like this new SIMD coming in for from Solana ecosystem, which is like basically trying to have fees that is proportional to the compute, and we are like quite efficient, so it reduces the gas fees for us. So any market makers, it's going to be way cheaper to quote on Archer if you were trying to quote on other dexes, because Archer is like extremely optimized. So Archer is going to be benefiting from this new SIMD that is going to be uh, going live. And yeah, so I think like cost management is something that we're trying to do. Obviously if you come with like a large scale TVL, you have like more, if there's more volume, if you come up with like $1 million of TVL, your the costs are going to be far less than the profits you'll end up making. But yeah, I think the more we try to reduce and minimize this costs, the better for our end users, which are market makers. So just working on that. I think it's not a very hard problem, but it's something that we are just trying to solve constantly. And like we are hoping that it will be like a solve problem in a significant better sense than what it is today. Yeah.
That makes sense. Sorry, one more question, Dhrumil. We drew parallels to intent-based solutions, and with the evolution of intent-based bridging and how capital intensive it is, we saw it be decentralized and people create LP pools that were then used as solvers, and then it was creating yield. Do you envision a future where if a market maker is performing on Archer through the order books, will we see a similar decentralized structure where someone like a normal person like me could LP into those market making operations and earn yield? Is that the future you see, or do you think the space will be privatized and we will see more market makers come on, but it will be a private affair versus it being LP led?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think LPing is like great, like very unique to crypto, because usually like market making firms have their own capital which they use to trade. And I think what we're seeing in crypto is that there are many individual market makers. For example, these are like not very trading firms which have like very high capital to put and code, but they have like necessary skill sets to do market making. So we kind of, I think there's like a good product where we can like kind of build, where a market maker is kind of coming in and trying to bring the skill, but then the TVL is kind of sourced by, let's say, the retail providers like LPs and so on. And this retail liquidity is kind of managed by this expert market maker. They can choose the vaults. We kind of already see that happening on HLP vaults and Hyperliquid, right? So I think that's a great way to bootstrap liquidity. So we kind of, yeah, I think that's a product that can definitely be built on top of Archer. So like users can just build vaults, and like there can be retail LPs who can just deposit liquidity, but then the expert gets to manage the books in a way where like they cannot run away with the TVL, but they can just manage the books. So I think that's a great product on top of Archer, and we definitely make it happen. It's in fact possible today itself. So if anyone wants to kind of take up this project, like I think that's a great shot at building on Archer. Like you can DM me, and I think it's something that can be quite helpful and quite good for the ecosystem. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, Dhrumil, this has been awesome. I think I learned a lot about, how these order books function. I'm very excited to see the future of order books. I'm very, very, I'm always pleasant, it's always pleasant to see you guys on the timeline as well. I think your technical deep dives are awesome. the sort of meme punch that the Archer Twitter has is also pretty cool as well. So I'm very excited to see more of that. Dhrumil, thank you so much for the time. This has been great.
Thanks, Rajit, for having me. Take care.